Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish and the sea, and the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth." But the word dominion was never meant to mean destruction. Animals, plants, and inanimate beings are by nature destined for the common good of past, present, and future humanity. Dominion means stewardship. It means kindness to God's creation. Welcome back to the Compass Podcast, where we seek the truth. I'm your host, Nick Burbano, and today we're going to uncover what it means to truly care about the environment as a Catholic. So join me in another episode. We believe everything created by God has a meaning, a purpose, and a place in His divine plan. The book of Genesis gives man authority. It gives man responsibility. Romans 1:20 tells us that God's invisible attributions are made visible through things He has made. This is echoed by St. Thomas Aquinas, who wrote in Summa Theologiae that the diversity in creation reflects the fullness of God's goodness. In other words, creation is a mirror to the Creator. Pope John Paul II, in his 1990 peace message, called ecological destruction a moral issue. He said modern society will find no solution in the ecological problem unless it takes a serious look at its lifestyle. So why should Catholics care? Because the moral law commands us to. Because creation is not ours, it's God's. And because the way we treat creation reveals how seriously we take our faith. In past episodes, we've explored the hidden costs of technology, such as child labor in the Congo cobalt mines. But environmental harm is broader and deeper. According to A.J. Barber's Consumed, the fast fashion industry has produced about 92 million tons of waste annually. Entire communities in the global south are burdened by landfills filled with discarded clothing. The World Health Organization reports that environmental risks, air pollution, unsafe water, poor sanitation contributes to over 13 million deaths per year. And as documented in Intertwined by Rebecca Kormos, these burdens fall disproportionately on women and children. From soil erosion to water scarcity, from collapsing biodiversity to rising diseases. These are the consequences of man turning away from his moral responsibility. As Pope Benedict once warned, the external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. Environmental justice, then, isn't about guilt. It's about the truth. And it starts with seeing clearly. Some today have elevated nature to be some kind of God. Others ignore it completely and say it's all part of a political agenda. St. Augustine, in the City of God, warned against idolatry of created things. Yet he also taught that creation points upwards, towards its creator. The vision flows from what is called the ordo amoris, the proper ordering of love. Unlike modern political interpretation, which often use theological principles to justify man's narrated power structures, Augustine's ordo amoris teaches that everything must be loved according to its proper value, always placing God above all. St. Thomas Aquinas built upon this, especially in his discussion on natural law. In Summa Theologiae, St. Thomas Aquinas affirms that God's internal law is made knowable to us through the natural law. Human reason allows us to discern the proper use and order of things. Food, land, animals, relationships, all meant for good use, not abuse. This is no new idea. Even earlier, Aristotle taught in Nicomachean Ethics and Politics that justice requires an ordering of the soul, and that everything has natural end, telos. Disorder, whether moral or ecological, is a rupture in that order. Harmony, whether in society or in nature, comes from living in accord with the purpose things were made for. To love nature rightly is to see it not as God, nor as nothing, but as something good, precisely because it comes from God and points back to Him. Now you may say, then who's a good example in this world so filled with corruption, misinterpretation, and greed? Well, I'd say look at the saints. St. Francis of Assisi called the sun his brother and the moon his sister, not out of sentimentality or as deities, but because he saw in them the Creator's artistry and order. For St. Francis, every element of creation was a reminder of God's providence and love. His famous Canticle of the Creatures is one of the first known works of literature written in the Italian vernacular, and it celebrates not just nature, but the interconnectedness of all life under God. He saw himself not above creation, but within it, part of a divine family. St. Francis lived what he preached, and in gratitude for even the smallest of gifts. He challenged his followers to strip away material access, find joy in the created world, not as an end in itself, but as a signpost towards heaven. He preached that we must live simply, so others and creation itself may simply live, not as a political slogan, but as a spiritual truth rooted in the gospel. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century Benedictine abbot, composer, visionary, and later declared doctor of the church, coined the term viriditas, God's greening power, referring to the vital force and flourishing energy she saw as radiating through all of creation, from herbs to stars to the human body and soul. She saw creation as a unified whole infused with divine life. Her theology and medicine were deeply interconnected, viewing the health of the body and the land and the soul as mutually dependent. When humans disrupted nature's balance through sin or greed, Saint Hildegard believed that this disorder would be echoed in illness and ecological decay. She wrote of the earth as a reflection of God's order, a harmony that, when preserved, draws the soul closer to its creator. And Saint Martin de Porres, born of African indigenous descent in Lima, Peru, lived a life of profound humility and compassion. Though he faced racial discrimination, he became a Dominican lay brother, renowned for his tireless care of the sick, the poor, and even the stray animals, and created a sanctuary where even rats and dogs found refuge. His charity knew no limit. He often gave away his own food and belonging. His reverence for all life was a quiet, holy echo of the gospel lived authentically. These saints didn't see creation like an obstacle, but rather a gift. But then what does that mean to live in this teaching today? It means we follow Catholic principles. Things like practicing temperance, avoiding overconsumption, supporting ethical labor and fair trade, making moral purchase choices, fasting not just from food but from waste, considering not just that we consume, but how and why we consume what we do. For by him all things were created, visible and invisible. All things were created through him and for him. Creation begins with Christ and finds its destiny in him. That means every tree, every river, every breath is part of God's cosmic plan. Caring about the environment isn't a side issue. It's part of the gospel as well. Not because nature is divine, but because it's made by the divine. When we care for creation, we're not giving into ideologies. We're living as people who believe in everything in the world is meant to glorify him. So let us stop seeing this as a political issue, as party politics. Let's see the world rightly. Let us use creation as God intended. Let us walk the path not to comfort, but to truth, because the truth will set us free. As Christ himself said in John chapter 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. St. Francis of Assisi, St. Hildegard of Bingen, St. Martin de Porres, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, pray for us. Our world is God's gift, and we are its stewards. Until next time, guys, and never forget to seek the truth.